Archaeologists and Egyptologists like myself believe that the Sphinx was sculpted around 2500 BC by King Khafre as a part of his funerary complex.
Beneath the sands of Giza, a silence has endured for over 4,000 years.
During the 18th and the 19th century, the Sphinx was just known with his head. So people didn't know what it was. It was the head of a man, maybe a pharaoh. People maybe didn't know.
Pharaoh Khafre was no ordinary ruler. He was a god king, obsessed with eternity and determined to carve his name into the very fabric of time. Yet with every layer archaeologists peel back, his story grows darker and more unsettling. Hidden chambers, impossible statues, and traces of knowledge that should never have existed have begun to surface. Who was Kafra beyond the monuments we see? And what secret did he seal beneath his pyramid? More than 4,000 years ago, one pharaoh reshaped the desert into a monument that refused to die. His name was Kafra, a king of Egypt's 4th dynasty, ruling in the middle of the 26th century BC. His reign left behind one of the greatest architectural legacies the ancient world had ever seen. Khafre's pyramid, once standing at a staggering 143.5 meters, rose almost as tall as his father's Great Pyramid. But what made his mark unforgettable was not height alone. It was the vision of an entire sacred landscape, a pyramid, a valley temple, a long ceremonial causeway, and the most mysterious statue ever carved in stone, the Great Sphinx. Its face, weathered yet unmistakable, is believed by many to be Khafre's own, staring endlessly toward the horizon as if guarding eternity. This was the peak of the Old Kingdom's power, when stone was not only quarried, but also commanded into forms that seemed beyond human ability. Khafre ruled as more than a king. To his people, he was a god walking the earth. Every block of limestone, every slab of granite, was arranged to ensure his immortality, so that his name would outlast the desert winds and the collapse of kingdoms. And yet, for all that he left behind, archaeologists would eventually uncover something even stranger. A statue linked to his reign, carved from a material so impossible to shape, it made experts pale when they realized what they were looking at: the statue of impossible stone. In the year 1860, deep in the sands of Giza, French archaeologist Auguste Mariette was excavating the valley temple connected to Khafre's pyramid. What he uncovered inside that temple stunned the world of Egyptology. Seated calmly on a throne, with falcon wings of the god Horus stretched protectively around his head, was a life-sized statue of Pharaoh Khafre. At first glance, it seemed like a typical royal sculpture, powerful, divine, and built to outlast time. But when scholars examined the material, they realized this was no ordinary stone. The statue was not carved from the soft limestone of Giza, nor even the familiar granite of Aswan. Instead, it was hewn from anorthosite gneiss, an extremely hard metamorphic rock with a dark, almost greenish sheen that glimmers when caught in the light. It is a material far tougher than granite, resistant to weathering, and almost impossible to shape with the copper tools available in Khafre's time. Its durability gave the statue an eternal quality, and its shimmering surface projected a sense of divine prestige, as if Khafre himself had been carved not from the earth, but from a fragment of the gods. The mystery deepened when the stone's source was identified. This gneiss could not be found anywhere near Giza. Geological studies showed that it came from a remote site known as Gebel El Asr in Lower Nubia, about 65 kilometers northwest of Abu Simbel. That meant the ancient Egyptians had quarried the blocks in an unforgiving desert landscape, transported them across hundreds of kilometers of river and land, and finally delivered them to Giza, where master sculptors shaped them into one of the most famous statues of the Old Kingdom. How was this possible? Moving limestone blocks from nearby quarries was one challenge, but sourcing and transporting gneiss required planning, manpower, and engineering that far exceeded what written records describe. Even modern engineers look at the logistics of such a task with respect. To move material of this density across that distance in an age without iron tools, without wheeled vehicles as we know them, and without the benefit of industrial machinery, speaks to an organizational ability that seems almost impossible to imagine. And yet the statue exists, unshaken by centuries, polished with a brilliance that still gleams in museum light. Khafre's monuments were not built only to impress his people or to glorify his kingship. They were built to signal dominion over both the land of Egypt and the very resources hidden within its farthest deserts. The choice of stone was deliberate. The pharaoh could have been immortalized in local limestone or granite like many of his predecessors. Instead, he demanded the hardest, most exotic stone his craftsmen could reach. The message was clear. His power extended over the Nile, over Nubia, and into eternity itself. Archaeologists often speak of Khafre's pyramid and the Sphinx, but the gneiss statue adds another dimension to his legacy as a demonstration of technological power, preserved in mineral form, whispering of techniques and abilities beyond what history recorded. And it is this trail of the quarries themselves, scattered across barren desert landscapes, that continues to raise questions. How did the ancient Egyptians extract such unforgiving stone in such remote places? And what secrets still lie buried in the quarries of the pharaoh? The quarries of the pharaoh. Far from the fertile fields of the Nile, in the harsh, desolate landscape of Lower Nubia, lies a site that holds the true scale of Khafre's ambition. This is Gebel el-Asr, a remote quarrying zone located about 65 kilometers northwest of Abu Simbel. To the casual eye, it appears only as a barren desert marked by broken outcrops of stone. Yet beneath its windswept surface, archaeologists have uncovered a story of organization, labor, and persistence that reshapes how we understand the Old Kingdom. When teams of archaeologists began surveying Gebel el-Asr in detail, they did not find a few scattered pits where stones had been cut. Instead, they uncovered an entire industrial complex spread across the desert. Multiple quarry faces scarred the landscape, their chiseled walls still bearing the marks of ancient extraction. Long ramps stretched down from the quarry mouths, carefully constructed to allow massive blocks of stone to be dragged toward loading zones. The evidence suggested not a sporadic visit to the site, but a continuous effort carried out on a scale almost unimaginable for the time. The stone they extracted here was no ordinary building material. Gebel el-Asr was the source of an orthosite gneiss, the same impossibly hard stone used for Khafre's seated statue. Alongside it, workers also cut diabase and related hard stones, each with properties that made them prized for durability and visual power. Unlike the soft limestone quarried near Giza, these stones could not be cut quickly or easily. Every block represented weeks of labor and precision. Archaeologists discovered that the Egyptians not only mastered the art of extracting such unforgiving rock, but they did so systematically, with teams working across multiple extraction points simultaneously. Archaeological discoveries at the site also revealed more about the organization behind this effort. Scattered around the quarry faces are traces of long-term human occupation. Pottery fragments litter the ground, remnants of food storage jars and water containers, the everyday tools of workers who lived on site for months or even years at a time. Flint tools, dolerite pounders, and stone hammers have been recovered, each worn from repeated use against the hardest surfaces nature could provide. These tools were not symbolic, but practical. The very implements that shaped blocks destined for the temples and monuments of Giza. Archaeologists also discovered that these workers were not merely temporary visitors. Evidence of shelters, storage spaces, and even wells shows that life at Jebel El Asr was permanent and organized. Teams of quarrymen lived in rough but structured camps, supplied by regular shipments from the Nile. Food, water, and tools had to be delivered across a desert route stretching dozens of kilometers. This meant logistical systems like caravans of donkeys or oxen carrying supplies were in place, as well as overseers ensuring the flow of materials and administrators recording quotas and deliveries. This was a workforce supported by a state apparatus functioning at an industrial scale. The sheer scale of activity at Jebel El Asr challenges older views of the Old Kingdom as a society limited in technology and organization. Instead, it shows us a state capable of mobilizing and sustaining hundreds, perhaps thousands of workers in remote locations for decades. It shows an economy powerful enough to divert resources from farming communities along the Nile to feed quarrymen in barren deserts. It shows an administration with the ability to track and direct the movement of stone from distant Nubian quarries to construction sites on the Giza plateau. In short, Jebel El Asr demonstrates that Khafre's Egypt was not only a kingdom of monumental visions, but also of logistical mastery. But extracting the stone was only the first stage of an extraordinary process. Once quarried, these immense blocks had to be transported across deserts, rivers, and valleys to reach their final destination. The question that still haunts archaeologists is simple yet daunting. How did the ancient Egyptians move the unmovable? Moving the unmovable. When the great blocks of gneiss and diabase were cut from the quarry faces at Jebel El Asr, the real challenge was only beginning. It was one thing to chip a stone loose from its bedrock, but it was another to move that block across blistering desert, down to the Nile, and then all the way north to Giza. To look at those stones today, some weighing many tons, is to wonder how such a thing could have been possible without the machinery of the modern age. Yet the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom achieved it, not once or twice, but systematically, with a level of engineering that still leaves researchers in awe. Archaeological surveys at the quarries have revealed wide ramps descending from the extraction points. These were not improvised slopes of sand, but carefully constructed roadways. They were graded at angles that minimized the danger of collapse, reinforced with layers of rubble and stone, and in some cases, extended for hundreds of meters. At the base of these ramps, wide loading areas were carved out, places where the blocks could be staged, prepared, and made ready for the journey across the desert. It was here that men organized into teams, ropes were tied to sledges, and the first stage of transport began. The method they used has been tested in modern experiments. Ancient reliefs depict workers hauling large statues on sledges, with one detail that once seemed symbolic: a figure pouring water onto the sand in front of the runners. When engineers replicated the technique, they found that dampening the sand reduced friction by as much as 50%, allowing heavy loads to slide far more easily than on dry ground. This simple, brilliant method transformed the impossible into the achievable, and it is almost certain that the quarrymen of Jebel El Asr relied on it as they dragged the blocks to the banks of the Nile. From there, the operation shifted to the river. The Nile was the highway of ancient Egypt, and its seasonal floods provided the current that carried ships downstream toward the capital. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that massive transport boats were specially designed to carry these oversized stones. Flat-bottomed hulls, reinforced with heavy timbers, allowed them to float immense loads that would have been unthinkable on land alone. At the quarry sites themselves, staging platforms suggest that the blocks were maneuvered onto barges during the inundation season, when floodwaters reached into desert edges and made loading possible. Once the blocks were afloat, the journey to Giza began. The river carried them downstream for hundreds of kilometers, guided by teams of oarsmen and steersmen who understood the Nile's shifting currents. At intermediate points, landing stages allowed for temporary unloading, resupply, or even further hauling over land where cataracts made sailing impossible. The process was long and grueling, but it was effective. Each block, no matter how massive, could be floated to the heart of Egypt's royal building projects, provided the logistics were carefully timed with the flood season. When the cargo reached the vicinity of Giza, the final stage of land transport began. Here again, ramps played a decisive role. Archaeological traces suggest that the Egyptians engineered causeways and embankments with precise gradients, ensuring that teams of workers could drag blocks upward without catastrophic collapse. Drainage channels were built into these ramps to prevent water damage, and side walls reinforced the structure against erosion. These were not temporary dirt mounds, but engineered features designed for repeated use, reflecting a deep understanding of physics and material stress long before the discipline had a name. Khafre's builders did not improvise. They planned, staged, and executed one of the most sophisticated logistical operations in the ancient world, centuries before similar feats were even attempted elsewhere. And when the stones finally arrived at Giza, they entered another phase of transformation, one that would take raw blocks and shape them into polished monuments. These were no ordinary workshops, but places where divine images were carved, and where the line between human craftsmanship and godly creation began to blur. It is here, in the workshops of the gods, that Khafre's vision took its final form. The workshops of eternal craft. At the base of Khafre's pyramid complex lies a structure that looks plain from the outside, but holds one of the most revealing clues about how the pharaoh's vision became reality. This is the Valley Temple, a building that stood at the end of the ceremonial causeway, where the Nile once lapped at its base during the flood season. To many visitors, it may have seemed like a place of ritual, a threshold between the world of the living and the realm of the gods. But archaeology has revealed that it was more than a temple. It was a workshop, a place where the hardest stones were brought to life under the hands of Egypt's master craftsmen. Inside its walls, archaeologists reportedly discovered not only finished statues of Kafra, but also fragments and unfinished pieces that revealed something extraordinary. On these half-completed surfaces, tool marks remain visible, proving that the sculptors were not blindly chipping away, but using controlled techniques to shape gneiss, granite, and diabase, stones so hard that even modern steel tools struggle against them. The marks show that the craftsmen used dolerite pounders and abrasives with remarkable precision, striking and grinding surfaces until smooth planes emerged. Each groove and indentation is a frozen moment of ancient labor, proof that the Egyptians had mastered techniques that defy the expectations of their age. The scale of their knowledge becomes clearer when we examine how the stones were fitted within the temple itself. The blocks of granite that line its walls were not roughly stacked, but joined with joints measured in millimeters. Some seams are so tight that even a blade of modern steel cannot slide between them. The accuracy of this fitting suggests not only careful measurement, but also a system of repeated testing, dressing, and polishing that transformed rough-cut blocks into geometrically precise forms. The Valley Temple shows that for Khafre's builders, construction was not brute force alone. It was technical artistry guided by mathematical planning. But the choice of materials carried meaning beyond engineering. Khafre's statues and walls were not carved from limestone, the stone of ordinary tombs, but from exotic materials chosen for their symbolism. The dark gleam of an orthosite gneiss evoked eternity, its unyielding surface a metaphor for a ruler who would not decay. The granite and diabase reflected permanence and stability, qualities associated with divine kingship. To place such stones in the temple, to shape them into forms of the pharaoh himself, was to fuse technical achievement with ideological power. The materials were the message, declaring that Kafra was eternal, indestructible, and reborn with the gods. Walking through the Valley Temple today, one feels both the weight of stone and the weight of intention. The polished floors, the towering blocks, and the surviving statues create an atmosphere not of raw labor, but of finished perfection. Yet beneath that surface lies the evidence of workshops that functioned at the limits of human ability. Every surface tells us that the Egyptians had developed methods for abrasion, polishing, and alignment that were not only effective, but astonishingly refined for 2500 BC. And yet, behind this precision lies an even deeper question. What tools and techniques allowed them to achieve such results? The answer may be hidden not only in the chisels and pounders, but also in forces even more subtle, forces that harnessed water and time in ways we are only beginning to understand. Secrets of water and time. To understand how Khafre's builders achieved their feats, it's important to consider the environment itself, because the Nile and the desert were not static backdrops, but active forces shaping what was possible. During the time of Khafre's reign, the climate of northeastern Africa was different from today. The Sahara had not yet hardened into the lifeless expanse we see now. Paleoclimate studies, based on sediment cores, fossil pollen, and ancient lake deposits, show that the region was probably wetter, with more frequent rainfall and a more dynamic Nile system. This was a landscape of seasonal abundance and shifting watercourses, and Khafre's planners learned to use it to their advantage. The Nile itself was the central artery of the kingdom, swelling each year with floods that transformed the land. But beyond the main channel, paleo-channels such as Wadi Tushka carried floodwaters deep into the desert, creating temporary corridors of transport that are visible today only from satellite images and geological surveys. To most, these vanished channels are forgotten scars on the desert floor. To Khafre's engineers, they were opportunities, natural highways of water that could be exploited to move supplies, support camps, and even ease the transport of heavy stone from quarry to river. Timing was everything. Quarrying could not happen without food and water for the workers, and transport could not succeed without the Nile's currents. Khafre's administrators appear to have synchronized their operations with the rhythm of the river. When the inundation peaked, stone was moved to barges. When waters receded, desert wells and reservoirs kept camps alive. Archaeological remains at sites like Gebel el-Azhar show wells cut with deliberate precision, drilled into geological layers that guaranteed access to groundwater. These were not accidental pits, but engineered lifelines. They provided a permanent water supply in an otherwise uninhabitable region, making long-term occupation possible and securing the labor force needed for years of extraction. The integration of climate knowledge and hydrological engineering suggests that Khafre's projects were not only technical marvels, but also environmental triumphs. The builders were not fighting against the desert. They were working with its cycles, harnessing floods, channels, and aquifers with a sophistication that points to generations of observation and accumulated expertise. In this sense, the monuments of Giza are not only stone achievements, but also hydrological ones. They are the frozen result of water and time being bent to human purpose. This environmental mastery also reframes how we see the Old Kingdom. Too often, the pyramids are imagined as static piles of stone built by brute labor. But in reality, they were the product of a civilization deeply attuned to seasonal rhythms, geological resources, and ecological opportunities. The The fact that Kafra could sustain large-scale desert operations for decades in regions that today are bone dry is a reminder of how skillfully his administrators balanced natural forces. Without their precise timing of floods, their use of paleo-channels, and their engineering of wells, the great works of stone would have remained unquarried, stranded far from the Giza plateau. Even today, when hydrologists trace the ancient water systems of the Nile Valley, they find evidence of these vanished pathways and engineered wells. The conclusion is unavoidable. Khafre's reign was not only about monuments rising from stone, but also about an entire system of knowledge that turned water into a tool as vital as any hammer or chisel. But for all the insight into quarries, ramps, floods, and climate, there is one monument in Khafre's complex that still holds questions no scholar has been able to answer fully. The Sphinx, carved from living rock, sits in silence as if guarding its own secrets. Beneath its paws and deep under its weathered body, mysteries remain that may hold the final key to Khafre's vision. Mysteries beneath the Sphinx. The Great Sphinx of Giza is an integral part of Khafre's pyramid complex, carved directly from the bedrock of the plateau. Its colossal form, a lion's body fused with a human head, widely believed to bear Khafre's own likeness, crouches before the causeway that once linked the valley temple to the pyramid. To ancient eyes, it was both guardian and divine emblem, a monument that bound earth and sky, man and God. To modern researchers, however, the Sphinx holds another role. It is a puzzle, concealing beneath its weathered body a network of features that science has only begun to reveal. Over the past century, advances in archaeological science have allowed researchers to probe beneath the surface without excavation. Ground-penetrating radar and electrical resistivity studies have been applied around the Sphinx, and their results have fueled decades of debate. These surveys detected anomalies and zones where the readings suggested voids or breaks in the natural rock. Some appeared beneath the paws, others along the flanks, and still more to the rear of the monument. While the exact nature of these anomalies remains uncertain, their geometry suggested not random fractures but potential cavities. To some scholars, these could represent ancient chambers or shafts, deliberately cut during the construction of Khafre's complex. Historical accounts add to the mystery. In 1837, the explorer and antiquarian Colonel Howard Vyse recorded reports of possible passages within or beneath the Sphinx. His notes were fragmentary, and no such tunnels have been confirmed by excavation, but they remain part of the Sphinx's lore. Later claims of hidden chambers, whether by early excavators or by fringe theorists, have often stretched evidence too far. Yet the modern surveys confirm at least one important fact. There are indeed unexplored subsurface features beneath the Sphinx and its enclosure. The distinction, however, is crucial. Many of the anomalies may be natural cavities in the limestone bedrock or intrusions caused by later human activity in the thousands of years since Khafre's reign. The Sphinx has endured centuries of erosion, excavation, and restoration, all of which have altered the geological record. But the presence of voids is not in dispute. They exist, their shapes mapped by instruments, waiting for direct investigation. The unanswered question is whether any of these cavities were intentional, and if so, what purpose they served. For Egyptologists, the possibility of hidden structures beneath the Sphinx raises profound implications. If there are chambers connected to the monument, they may reveal how the Sphinx was integrated into Khafre's wider pyramid complex. Could they have served as symbolic passageways, linking the pharaoh's image to the underworld? Could they have stored ritual objects, foundation deposits, or records tied to his reign? Or were they part of a larger architectural vision, one that bound pyramids, temples, causeways, and the Sphinx into a unified sacred landscape? What complicates the matter further is the lack of conclusive exploration. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities has long maintained strict control over excavations in this most sensitive of sites. The fear of damaging the monument has left most of the anomalies untested, their nature unresolved. What we know for certain is that the Sphinx is not a simple sculpture resting on solid rock, but a monument standing above subsurface mysteries. Its guardianship extends not only outward across the plateau, but downward into the stone itself, where time and geology conceal secrets that even Khafre's architects may have intended to remain hidden. But if the Sphinx whispers of mysteries buried in stone, another question looms even larger. How much knowledge that once made such wonders possible has vanished from human memory? The vanishing knowledge. What stands out most about the reign of Kafra is not simply the monuments he left behind, but the sudden intensity of achievement they represent. In his time, we see an extraordinary mastery of quarrying, transport, and construction, executed with precision and on a scale that seems to rise out of nowhere. Entire quarries in the Nubian desert were mobilized, workers sustained for years in remote landscapes, blocks weighing many tons hauled hundreds of kilometers, and monuments assembled with joints so fine they remain a marvel to this day. Yet, what followed this peak is even more striking. After the Old Kingdom collapsed around the end of the 6th dynasty, the ability to replicate such feats appears to have vanished. Later pharaohs built great temples and statues, but none matched the exacting scale and precision of Khafre's generation. The knowledge that allowed them to move the unmovable, carve the uncarvable, and build the unshakable seems to have slipped from human hands, leaving no manuals, no blueprints, and no clear chain of transmission. It did not gradually evolve into greater techniques, as we might expect, but instead disappeared, leaving only the stone as witness. Modern archaeologists and engineers have attempted to reproduce the methods with tools available to the Old Kingdom. Experiments with copper chisels, dolerite pounders, and wooden sledges demonstrate ingenuity, but the results often fall short of what the monuments demand. We can imagine how ramps might have worked, how water reduced friction, and how abrasives polished stone. But the leap from theory to practice remains daunting. Even under controlled conditions, with far fewer constraints than Khafre's workers faced, modern efforts cannot match the precision of joints measured in millimeters or the flawless polish of statues carved in gneiss. This leaves us with a fundamental question that continues to haunt the study of ancient Egypt. How much knowledge has been lost from the civilizations that came before us? Was there a body of expertise that vanished with the political and social collapse of the Old Kingdom? Did centuries of practice culminate in Khafre's reign, only to dissolve when the centralized state that supported it disintegrated? Or are we glimpsing only fragments of a much larger system of skills, techniques, and cultural memory that we have yet to fully reconstruct? What we do know is that Khafre's achievements remain unmatched for millennia. Long after his dynasty ended, his pyramid still towered almost as high as the horizon itself. His Sphinx stared across the desert, and his statues gleamed in temples that outlived empires. They are testaments not only to ambition, but also to a level of organization, planning, and craftsmanship that even now commands respect, reminding us that history is not a simple ladder of progress, but a shifting landscape where peaks of knowledge can rise suddenly and vanish just as quickly, leaving later generations to wonder how it was ever possible. Do you believe there is still more to uncover within Khafre's monuments? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.